Okay, brilliant. So hi again, everyone. Thank you for joining us and welcome to the 5th Technology Showcase from Open Ownership. My name's Stephen. I'm the Head of Technology for Open Ownership. And these showcases highlight and give a space to talk about interesting projects that are looking at company ownership and control all over the world, often with a technology focus, but sometimes with kind of politics and data mixed in just for fun. We've got 3 really great presentations today from people. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to be handing over to the speakers and they'll be doing a presentation for about 15 minutes each. And then we'll have some time after each presentation for questions and hopefully have a kind of discussion about the project you've just seen. And then that'll be it. We're trying to squeeze quite a lot into an hour. So first up, we have Sara Brimbeuf from Transparency International France talking about an investigation that her team did recently into company ownership and real estate in France. Second, we have Scott and Boris. So Scott is from Black Ice AI and Boris from Senzing, talking about beneficial ownership data and risk screening. And finally, we have Josh Williams, who's from Integral Code Limited in the UK, and is talking about the new open ownership register that we unveiled a couple of weeks ago. So I will stop sharing my screen and I will hand over the reins to Sara to talk through our project. Take it away, Sara.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Stefan, and thank you very much for Open Ownership to allows me to present our work here. So let me share my my presentation. You should be able to see it in a couple of seconds. Yes, and I'll just expand the screen. Okay. Okay. So I will present a report we published a couple of months ago in July 2023 with colleagues from Transparency International. I myself am from Transparency International France, based in Paris. And we also worked with the ACDC, that you may know that they are based in Washington, D.C. They are the Anti-Corruption Data Collective, and they collect data. And this work, the aim of this report was really to dig in the French BO registry because it exists since 5 years. It was created in 2018 according to EU legislation and is accessible by the public since 2021. And since then, no one had really digged into this registry. No one had really did this global micro work on the data for several reasons. First, because 2021 is not that far ago, that long ago, and also because even if the registry in France is accessible without having to pay a fee or without having to register, the data was not available in bulk format, which means that data analysts and journalists and any person who wanted to have a big picture of the register and the data it contains had to manually scrap all the data one by one and to be able to analyze it. So that was a big job, and we did it last year, a year ago, between October and November 2022. And I won't enter too much into the methodology details because this work was mainly done by our colleagues from ACDC. But after having scrapped all the data and found all information regarding individual companies, we basically cross-checked those data with another register, which is the real estate register, that contains all information regarding corporate-owned real estate properties in France. And we found really interesting information. First, I will focus on the information that concerns just the BO registry. We found out that after 5 years of creation, 5 years after its creation, the French BO registry is still incomplete. And only 63% of the French established companies have disclosed their beneficial owners. Another explanation for this low rate is that some companies, even if they are registered in France, escape to the BO disclosure obligation because a part of these companies are foreign. So there may be a subsidiary or another legal form that allows them to escape any biodisclosure obligation. Another explanation for this low rate is that we discussed with French authorities. We showed them our results, and we found out that French authorities do not conduct many controls. So there is the obligation to disclose bio information, but they do not control the information. They do not cross-check this information, and they do not make sure that this information is conform to the reality. Another reason is that sanctions exist. When a company fails to disclose bio information, it may face fine, it may face the risk of being forbidden to participate to a public procurement, but these sanctions are rarely enforced, and they are actually not that dissuasive. For instance, the fine for a company is up to 37,000 euros, which is quite low for some companies that could clearly take the risk of being fined and just keep their bio information secret. We also found out that the disclosure rates varies among the regions in France. So I know that not everyone here is familiar with the French geography, but we can see that there is the Paris region, the famous French Riviera, and we found that sadly some territories distinguish themselves with a very low rates, and among these territories are the overseas territories. They are mostly in the Caribbean and in the east of Africa, near Madagascar. And this is quite sad, because most of these territories attract billionaires from all around the world, and among these billionaires are kleptocrats, oligarchs, and crooks businessmen. So this was a finding, and we never, in official reports or in parliamentary investigation and else, we never saw such precise, specific numbers regarding the biodisclosure rates per region in France. So that was quite interesting. We also found out that the East region near Germany and Switzerland was quite the rate of the disclosure rate was quite low, as well as for Corsica, the Corsican island. So now we can focus on some red flags. We also found out the usual red flags when you are working on anti-corruption and anti-money laundering, and that when you are using tools such as the beneficial ownerships registries. So we found out that a lot of French companies use mass addresses. And we found out that nearly 10% of all companies registered in France have at least one establishment registered in a mass address. We also found out that another 1/10% of the companies had establishment where the address was either missing or could not be verified with the official tools from the public authorities to make sure the address exists. So we also found that several companies use what we call baby bosses, so where beneficial owners are natural persons under 18, which is not illegal, but which may be used by certain criminals or certain actors who want to hide the real ownership of their properties through companies. And we also found out, as usual in corruption and money laundering cases, that multiple citizenship was also a trend in certain companies, where owners use their multiple citizenship to just hide the tracks and make sure that the different companies registered in different databases could not be linked to them because they are registered within different nationalities. So nothing new here, but it was interesting to have concrete figures, concrete data that we could show to the public first, because we published this report, but also to the French authorities. And some of them just really discovered the figures and are now working to improve and strengthen the register and adapt their control. So now I'd like to focus on the corporate-owned real estate because, as I was saying in the beginning, we cross-checked the French Bureau Registry with the French Real Estate Registry. Both registries are available in open data, which is really a good practice, and is not the case for many jurisdictions in the world. And here it was, in my opinion, one of the most interesting parts of the study. But we found that first we found we started with a number. 11% of all the properties in France, lands, building, any types of properties, is owned by a company. And a bit more than half of these properties are owned by French registered company, meaning that a big part of the companies that own French properties, French-based properties, are not registered in France and are either foreign companies or other types of legal entities. And when we focus on the 11% of parcels owned by companies, we found a shocking figure that actually that could be resumed as such, that the vast majority of corporate-owned real estate remain remained held anonymously in France. Hard word. So 71% of all corporate-owned parcels, meaning properties, lands, building, is owned by a company who has not declared its beneficial owner. And 71% of all companies that own real estate in France have not declared their beneficial owners. So this is quite a shocking number that could be explained with the same reasons that I was developing earlier: a lack of enforcement, sanctions that are not dissuasive enough, and a lack of control as well. This, even when we know that French real estate is famous among the world and attracts many tourists, which is okay, but also many oligarchs, many kleptocrats, and many crooked businessmen that just simply want to hide their illicit wealth in a safe investment, such as real estate. We know Paris, some of the fanciest neighborhood in Paris, or the French Riviera, for instance. So in this map of France, again, we shows where in France where are the highest rates of corporate-owned real estate properties, which is not illegal. It's completely legal to own a property through a company. So this was just to show the different rates. And there we see the usual areas I was mentioning: Paris here, the French Riviera, the region around Bordeaux, famously known for its wine, and so on. Here is another interesting territory. It's not that famous, but it is this is known for hunting lands, which attracts big fortunes and billionaires, as well as some Russian oligarchs. So this is quite interesting to have this spot here appearing on the map of properties owned by companies. And in the other map, and this I will terminate my presentation on this map, we see, and it's unfortunately not that clear because the yellow is maybe not the best choice, but we see all the corporate-owned properties that remain anonymously owned, where it is impossible to know who is the beneficial owner behind the company that owns the property. And here we see that we don't see the same areas as in the other map. For instance, the French Riviera, which attracts a lot of media attention, especially now that the French authorities are tracking down Russian oligarchs' assets, which are really present in this region. We see that it's not the darkest area of the map. We see Paris, but it's not the darkest area as well. And for instance, the eastern region near Germany and Switzerland, as well as Corsica, is much more darker. So we end there with this data, which requires more investigation, more studies to explain these disparities between rates. but it allows to adapt the risk analysis for authorities, but also for investors, for obliged entities such as lawyers, notaries, banks. And it really gives a more precise picture of the risk of money laundering, the risk of secrecy and opacity in France in the real estate sector. So just to finish here, having the opportunity to use the French bioregistry at such a deep level was really a game changer for us as an NGO to understand the trends, to understand the risks, and also to refine and strengthen our recommendation towards the French authorities, but also towards private actors, either companies or obliged entities. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Sara. I was just asking if anyone has any questions, please do add them to the chat. Martin's clapping. So yeah, congratulations for that. Just while I see if there's any more questions, can I ask one? You said that the authorities had kind of engaged with the findings. Can you say what changes they might be making, or are they doing anything to improve access to the data that's in the beneficial ownership register?
So they are still working. I mean, we published the report in July. We met them until the end of June, and I think we will meet them again in October. So we'll have more information. But they, for instance, discovered the rate of corporate-owned properties, and they were quite shocked. And I think they may adapt their control depending on geographical areas. As for the access to the data, you know that we are waiting for a new legislation at the EU level following a big decision last year in November, and since then the French government decided to just keep the register open, which is a great news. But it may change depending on what the EU institution decides as part of the Sixth Anti-Money Laundering Directive. So, I mean, normally, as you know, CSOs and journalists will have access to the register, and I think that in France it won't change. We have a good dialogue with authorities, but yes, we still closely follow the file because a lot of is being present.
Fantastic, thank you. One of my colleagues, Emma, I think, was on the call, or yeah, she's on the call. She's been trying to get hold of the French data, so I'm sure she'll be really, very interested in hearing that. Does anyone have any final questions? Please put your hand up if you'd rather say it out loud, or someone's just trying. If not, we'll say thank you to Sara and we can move on to the next presentation. Thank you so much for that. Sorry, we have to keep moving quickly today given the time. Next, I'd like to introduce, there's a joint presentation next. So from Scott and Boris, who are here, and I will leave them to introduce themselves properly. But I think, Scott, you're going to start off.
Right. I think that, thanks a lot. My name is Scott Uehlinger. I'm the, I work at Black Ice as a special projects manager, and Boris works at Senzing, and the companies are entwined in the sense that the Black Ice Sara program uses Senzing algorithms to perform its work. And so that's why we're jointly presenting. But I just wanted to start out by giving a little bit of a perspective, like a global perspective. And I think it was great that, you know, Sara speaking about France, because it turns over very well with what I want to say. You know, right now, the trend right now is not good. About 3.5% of global trade turnover is related to financial crime. Now that translates to about almost $1.5 trillion. And so that trend is up. And another thing that you have is we have recent events such as COVID fraud. That cost about, for instance, the UK, it cost $18 billion. The United States, it cost us, no one even knows, maybe over $100 billion. We have, as Sara mentioned, Russian sanctions. Asset freezing is also going on. And sort of in response to some of these things, we have other trends operating officially. The United States passed a Uyghur Labor Protection Act, and the Germans have a new Supply Chain Act. And the thing that those two acts have in common is that they're placing much more onus on company owners to perform proper due diligence against to prevent basically getting involved with companies whose ultimate beneficial owner is nefarious. So that's the trend. Basically, what we're looking at is companies are going to be increasingly held responsible for their decisions, for their proper due diligence, for basically having the proper business with the proper clients. And at the same time, governments such throughout Europe and the United States and elsewhere are going to be ramping up their capabilities and cracking down on things like money laundering and basically financial crime. The Germans recently are creating a federal bureau of business intelligence, is another step the Europeans are taking to show they're getting increasingly serious about these kinds of things. Now, one involved in black ice as a retired CIA guy is that what I learned talking to the CEO is that despite what I thought, there actually hasn't been a great deal of progress in these systems, the linking technology, et cetera, that is used, that the agency used, that I used a while ago. That has not really translated to a lot of progress in the private sector in the last, let's say, decade or so. Slightly more sophisticated record matching and linking programs, et cetera, are prevalent, but they're really legacy systems, and they really can't really do the proper job as Sara has pointed out about, you know, the tremendous amount of suspicious activity that's conducted with child bosses and UBOs and shell companies. And so that's why I decided to get involved, because I saw that there was something here, and that basically the world needs the technology to catch up to be able to deal with a lot of these threats. Now, you know, the Black Eye Senzing product, Sara, it's using Senzing artificial intelligence algorithms for entity resolution. And entity resolution is central to anti-money laundering and uncovering ultimate beneficial owners. Entity resolution is consolidating identities from different databases, as well as understanding or drawing attention to relations between different people and individuals or companies that people did not see before. And that is the benefit of this kind of a system. And as an operator, as somebody who used to deal, who very much needed this kind of information in the field, because I was a field officer, the important thing is with this artificial intelligence capability that's in the Black Ice Senzing product, Sara, is that it greatly reduces the number of false positives. And I'm sure Stephen and Sara can all attest that false positives are a huge problem in investigations as far as entity resolution. By reducing the false positives by 75%, that is freeing up a tremendous amount of time for an investigator to actually go after what matters. And so the importance of that is that with such a decrease in the number of false positives, that also allows you can reduce investigation time by perhaps up to 80% is possible. And so that would result in fewer personnel costs. You might be able to actually have fewer people or more efficient work. And so that's another advantage of the system, because you could amortize itself all the faster because of this. And so that's kind of the perspective I wanted to give, that, you know, that this product that Boris will start explaining perhaps better than I can sometimes is a very important tool, which will be increasingly important as both governments and companies find that they have to conduct better due diligence, KYC, to uncover the ultimate beneficial owner and to avoid money laundering or affiliation with money laundering parties. So thank you. And why don't we pass it along to Boris?
Thank you, Scott. Hey, Stephen, can you bring up the first slide, please?
Sure. Yeah. Oh.
So Scott is correct. My name is Boris Kusovski. I work out of Columbus, Ohio. I am the channel partner manager for Senzing. And what does that mean? My job is to take this sophisticated engine and get it deployed in somebody else's car. And the way this relationship works really is, if you look, Stephen is my gas with the data, and Scott is the car with the wrapped engine with the sensing technology inside. We currently have probably 8 different financial crimes offerings that have the sensing engine in it, some of the largest like Actimize and others. But I also have a couple of FIUs that also run sensing for discovering better relationships and entities as they investigate suspicious activity reports coming in from the financial institutions in those countries, or by queries that come in from external sources. At the end of the day, this technology links continuously as data comes in, so that you take the sensing engine, you deploy it locally, and then the actual value is bringing in all of the different data sources in the way we match the data across one or multiple data sources. And I'll give you a little bit of a snapshot about the different sources and the value. When Stephen gave us access to the open ownership data, we actually did some pretty interesting things with it. We found, no, just stay on that one for a second. We found interesting ownership insights. We found duplicates owners. We found address anomalies where there's companies registered, law firms' addresses, accounting firms, shared office locations, and others, and I'll talk more about that later. But what else we did is, inside of Sara, what we do, and actually a lot of our customers deploy this technology, is because you want to ingest as many data sources as possible so you can get a bigger view of the entity and the networks. And if you don't do that, you're going to miss a lot of things. And I'll show you that in a second. But what we've done in Sara in the statistics I'm going to present is, we've taken open ownership data and we've cross-pollinated it with ICIJ database, with watch list data, in some corporate registry, and actually in the current environment that's running live every day, we are going to ingest the whole entire company's house just to see what that data looks like, so we can actually authorities. Because time I think I'm going to scare how bad it really is bad. So at the end of the day, we actually discover entities and relationships, and with greater internal network value, so you could see how everybody's linked. And then we continuously do that. If corporate data changed, 100 new companies were registered today, if the watch list changed, if anything changed in the data sources you're feeding, it automatically reacts and shows you the results. Next slide, please, real quick. So here's some pretty interesting stats, just from the open ownership data for the 3 countries Stephen currently has. When we ingest the data, we ingested 2 different sources, the companies and the officers. And if you look, there's 3 interesting stats. On the company side, we compressed the database by 87,240 records. And what does that mean? That means our matching technology says that, hey, I have 87,000 duplicates. Back to the slide, please. I have 87,000 duplicates that people are not aware of that's showing up in the data. There you go. And if you look at the officers, 23.72% are duplicates. That means I have the same person owning more than one company, or owning ownership in more than one company. And then Sara actually talked about something that actually hits on the value of Senzing. When you look all the way to the right, if we can't link the 2 entities together, then we try to find what other common attributes do we have between them. Do we have company A and company B at the same address? Do they have the same phone number? Do they have the same email? We look at all of those additional attributes, and that's what Scott was talking about. We link on every attribute that's available. And if we can consolidate the entities to one or their relationships, then we do that. And if not, then you see it in the output into Sara of what those results look like from all of these different linkages. All right, so the value, and actually Scott touched on this, we approve the matching accuracy by looking at the entities across those sources. We actually give you smarter investigation. So when the investigator looks at it, he gets to see exactly what is linked. And actually, we were coached by a couple of investigators at FIUs how to display the data correctly. So when the investigator looks at Sara, he can see, hey, this is a sanctioned entity and it's in red. This is a ship and it's also sanctioned. This is a plane that's also sanctioned. And then the relationships and how they're related. And then Stephen coached us on how do we display the ownership and the percentages of the ownership. So now we can tell, hey, Boris owns a part of company, and here's the percentages and all of that. So all of that is available in Sara through the technology that Senzing provides underneath. Next slide, please. I pulled some interesting stats from the UK data. I wanted to show UK data, and actually one of the things on the right-hand side, Sara was talking about the French registry and the French data. On the right-hand side, what I'm showing you is how many owners are in the 3-country open ownership data by country. They're not in particular order. I just took them in alphabetical order, in some order where I could find the highest ones. But what we're saying here is in St. Kitts, there are less than 40,000 people on those 2 islands, but we have 72,000 owners in companies from those 3 countries that Stephen gave us: Denmark, Slovakia, and the UK. The number for France is 11,135. So my comment to you is the Sara platform is running and it's live. It's updated daily with all these sources. If anybody that's on this call wants to see it, wants to get a test drive, it is live and running, and it shows every statistic that's possible for anyone, anything that's in the database. A little bit about the company's registry and what we're seeing in this data. We're seeing a lot of fake companies registered. I don't know if the same thing's happening in France, but we look at the data that's coming in from Companies House every day, and I'll tell you what, it's very scary. For 12 pounds, you can pretty much create a company and add ownership at absolutely no discretion. Nobody's reviewing anything, anyone, or the address or anything that you put in. The Pakistani example was something that was happening in December of last year. What they were doing is creating companies with 1 letter flipped, and it was primarily the letter L to an I. Everything else was the same with the existing company at the same address and everything else. So if you look at matching technologies, if you don't use the tax ID, those 2 companies are going to resolve. And so what does that mean downstream? It's kind of scary. We also see the same fake ownerships that Sara was talking about. We're seeing 19, 20, 21-year-old kids that are being put as the CEO or controlling agent of the company. And then we're also seeing fake supporting LinkedIn profiles with no links at all for those entities. So if anybody's going to do KYC or due diligence on them, they're going to pass because they will pass. We're also seeing fake addresses. And I'm sorry, this is not a joke, but I was thinking about this while Sara was talking. In the UK, you're going to have company coming to your house. You get it? And that's exactly what's happening, because we're seeing thousands of addresses where companies are being registered to, and then the owner has, the person that lives at that address or the business that's at that address has no idea that this has been created. So we're seeing fake companies with fake names. We're seeing fake owners. We're seeing fake LinkedIn profiles. We're seeing compromised addresses. And then on top of that, when you look at the NICS codes and the industry that they're in, the ownership, the person's ownership, it says I'm in the restaurant business, but the industry for the business is in pig farming or biofuel. Absolutely doesn't make sense. There was something else from the Companies House database that's actually very interesting. Out of the 26 million records that are in there plus, 10 million of those are owners, and 600,000 of those 10 million are duplicates. So that gives you an idea of how many different duplicates or owners you have in companies. In the middle of the slide, this is a slice of what I was talking about how Senzing matches the data and the relationships. All right, so here's an example. 100% resolved entities from ICIJ. Those are the 4 or 5 Panama, Paradise, Bermuda database of about 2 million records. If I take the 100% resolved, no questions asked, and I match that with public figures and associates, adverse media, high-risk entities, there's the numbers: 484 PEPs, 711 adverse media records, and 9 high-risk entities. But then if I take that and I match it to Stephen's UBO file, I find 2,453 records that are also on ICIJ. And then when Sara displays all this, you're going to see all those additional linkages. But now, what if I did a 4-way? And the 4-way is ICIJ, UBO data, and Dow Jones data or watch list data. Then the picture gets even better, because now I have more linkages and more knowledge about who are these entities and the networks that are involved. So that's the power of Senzing. And again, inside of Sara, which is an active product, we actually can display all this data at any time, and it's a continuous process. So next slide, Steve.
Boris, just to say, you've just got a couple of minutes left, and then
I'm going to finish, because you know what? I actually think this is very important at the federal level and at the bank level. And here's why. I think the system is contaminated, especially in the UK. Once we load French data, we can look. But look, the contamination is going both ways, and this is why those circles in red are happening, and I'll explain what I mean. You can turn this upside down, you can turn it the other way around, it doesn't matter. They're all intertwined, because if you get bad records going into the company's or in the corporate registry at the federal level, now you have contaminated entities. And what we've seen that they have tried to open accounts, and we've seen that some of the customers that are aware that, you know, accounts are being opened in their behalf, they've turned on the credit fraud flag. And we've seen that in the UK, and we've validated that that's a fact. So what you have is, you have contamination in the company's registry or in the corporate registry within the country. And then as the bank open up these accounts, what happens is, part of KYC, you got to do your due diligence, and everything looks normal. It really looks normal until you really start looking at it. And I think that's why this technology gives you the ability to look into those insights and really realize that, hey, these are fake and they're not real, and they're set up for a specific purpose. The last piece I was going to share with you is this. A lot of these are set up for an immediate purpose. It's almost like a burner phone. They use them for whatever needs there are, and then the company never gets renewed. So what we're seeing in the corporate registry for the UK is a company gets started up, never renews, and they start on another one for whatever the next need is. And it's not from one region, it's actually from all regions. We see them from Pakistan, we see them from China, we see them from the Russian Federation countries. It's actually coming in from everywhere. And the UK is allowing this to happen, you know, because there's no validation. And I don't know if other countries are like that. We're going to load up other countries and look at it, but it's contaminated, guys. And again, without technology like this, it's going to be hard for you to figure out who's behind these entities. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Boris. I'm just going to stop sharing from my side. Does anyone have any questions? I was just trying to see if you do have any questions, please drop them in the chat or put your hand up, and we can have a quick minute or two for questions before we move on to the final presentation. Scott, so do you want to say?
Actually, I have a question, Stephen.
Sure.
Maybe you may be informed about this, or Boris. Me and Boris and I have discussed the problem with the British corporate registry. I guess for whatever reason, because we have that one available, we see the problems that are there, have you seen any sign within the UK government that they recognize that this is a tremendous problem, and what actions are they taking to alleviate it?
So yes, they are taking actions. If I can try and answer that. So there's the Economic Crime and Corporate Transparency Bill that is due to be passed by the British Parliament next month. So it's been worked on for the past year, and it builds on, 10 years at least or more of investigations and civil society activism in the UK, pointing out the issues, saying that Companies House is currently just a publisher of whatever information it's given.
Right.
And so the way Companies House talk about it is they're now going to become a gatekeeper. So they are staffing up on kind of enforcement side. They are getting more powers to query the data to stop companies registering. So that will be something. So Parliament's just gone into recess in the UK, but they'll be coming back, and it needs to pass by the end of October or early November to happen in this year. But yeah, so it's something that's kind of active and being worked on. People have pointed out there are still loopholes. There's ways that people can be named as nominees, but that's not declared, or trusts are still an issue where there's not enough transparency. So there's still, but there's a lot of powers that Companies House will be given, and then the question becomes, do they have enough money, and how are they going to use them?
Resources, right?
Yeah, just really quickly, Martin, I'll throw over to you for a quick question before the final presentation.
Thank you very much. It's not a question; it's just a comment of thanks and I'm from TI Portugal, and thank you for all the presenters so far. Unfortunately, for now, there is, I think, no available information regarding beneficial, at least not openly, regarding beneficial ownership and open ownership on Portuguese companies or companies established in Portugal. But for sure, we'll have a look at Sara. I didn't know about the platform, and we'll reach out to you guys if
Absolutely.
we need anything or would like to have the test run that Boris also mentioned. Thank you very much. Keep up the good work.
Thank you, Martin. Portugal has promised to use our data standard. Just very quickly, I'll drop the link in the chat. They have promised to do that. But
great news. Thank you very much.
Sorry, real quick. So the Portuguese numbers are 2,668. So that's how many Portuguese owners you have in your data.
Thank you, Boris. And thank you, Boris and Scott, for that presentation. It's really interesting. Finally, we have Josh Williams, who I've been very happy to be working with for the past couple of years at Open Ownership. Josh is going to talk to us about the new version of the Open Ownership Register, which we launched a couple of weeks ago. So over to you, Josh.
Sure, thank you. Let me see if I can share it. Okay, can people see that?
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay, perfect. So yeah, I've been working on improvements to the register for, well, the last couple of years, and I'm excited to unveil the new register. So for those of you not familiar, then the register is a way of searching the beneficial ownership data which we collect and process. So as an example, you can search by company name and see all of the matches for the different data sets. As most of you are aware, the current ones are from UK Companies House, Slovakia and Denmark are the three which are currently supported. So if you click on one, then you can see, in this case, we don't have beneficial owners listed, but you can see lots of companies controlled, for instance. We also include open corporates data on the right, and say where the data is from, address, that kind of thing. So this is basically standardizing the data from lots of different sources and allowing us to view and explore it, basically. So as another example of the exploration, you can see that you can see a graph, and Xerox is a good example because they just have so many companies. So this is just a tiny portion of the graph, but there's hundreds where one company controls another company which has a beneficial ownership interest in another company, and that kind of idea. So that's always quite a fascinating one to look at, and there's quite a few like that where you can see kind of long chains of that. But But anybody familiar with a register will think, okay, but what's new? Because all of this has been basically the same for the last few years. And they would have a very good point. So most of the changes which have happened have been in the background of how the data is collected and how the data is processed. So if we've done a job right, then although we have unveiled the new register, from the front end at the moment, you won't really see any changes. So what I'm going to talk about is what's happened in the background and what's that's going to unlock the possibilities of. So I'm just going to go through these advantages if I have time to cover them more. So one of them is that the statements now follow the BODS version 0.2 standard. So this is where you'll see the first sort of difference if you're exploring a data. So if you click on the download BODS JSON, then you'll see that we now have a replaces statement field and some others populated to try and follow the BODS specification. Now, one of the main differences with this standard compared to the previous standard we're using is the immutability of statements. So where before our process was that you would look through your source data, you would say, okay, this is about company such and such. So you would find that record, update it, and when it came to export the data, then you would produce a statement relating to it. Now, one of the ideas in BODS v 0.2 is that statements, once they're published, always exist. And then if you want to say something has changed, such as the address or a name or something like that, or the percentage of ownership control has been changed, then you would replace the statement and say, I'm publishing a new statement, which is replacing a previous one. So basically, this gives you an audit trail rather than kind of having completely different data month to month and kind of having to do some sort of diff to see what has changed between the two. So that's one of the main differences. So if you are looking at the BODS JSON, you will see fields like that are now populated. So another advantage, which might interest, like listening to some of the previous presentations to do with, I think the last one talking about continuously watching data coming through. So this is something which is going to be a real advantage in the new version, which is that we can have much more frequent imports and have the changes which are being published reflected much faster in our data. So I'll just talk about the technical design quickly, which is allowing that. So where before everything was in one giant monolithic application, we've kind of separated out any of the data collection and processing parts of that. So anything which is collecting data from various sources around the world, we call ingesters. So this might be looking at the snapshots file for the company's house or looking at their stream API. So that those would be two possible sources just for the UK data. But also we can scroll through Elasticsearch for the Denmark data because that's how we have access to that. Or I think Slovakia one is HTTP API calls, where you keep getting like a link to get the next piece of data with it being paginated. So those are just three examples of the sort of sources, but that's just about the collection of data. So the idea is to get some statement, usually in JSON form, to say, right, this is the data they have published with no changes from us. So the second bit is the transformation. So that's where we're trying to then standardize the data. And currently we also enrich that using data from open corporates as well to try to get like additional identifiers to make it more obvious if we're talking about the same company from multiple sources, etc. So the transformer's job is basically to take whatever a company has published and turn it into BODS version 0.2 format. So the ingester will just be, as I mentioned, reading a different sources of data. It will be deduplicating to try to say, have I seen this exact piece of data before? Because if it has, it's not new data. So that's the deduplication stage, and then it will publish to a stream. Now, I don't know if people are familiar with the concept of streams, but effectively it's just like a log, a sequence of messages. So somebody can say, okay, I want all of the messages after the 10th message. Or I want the next 100 messages, or even I just want to wait for more messages to come in. And it's a bit different to a queue, because with a queue, usually you have something and then the data's gone. With a stream, lots of things can access it. So you could have 10 different things all interested in the same source of data. So one of the advantages of this is that when we discover a new piece of data, we publish to the stream and we can have lots of different things interested in that new piece of data that's come through. And the other difference is that we're storing in Elasticsearch. So before, all of the raw data was not indexed in any way. So now, as well as all of our BODS data, we have all of the data indexed from a raw source data as well. So just a quick diagram there, you can see we have our input source goes through our ingester, which is deduplicating and writing to Elasticsearch. And then if anything new it finds, it is publishing to a stream. Now, the trouble with streams can be that they don't persist forever. So usually they last for 24 hours or 7 days or something with new records. So you also need to have some sort of sync where it kind of goes into a file or something. So that's just been set up where we say every time it reaches a certain size or after a certain amount of time, then we're just writing a file with it. So the end result of that is, as well as the data ending up in a stream, then we end up with these files as well. So we've got very similar for the transformer as well. So the only difference with the transformer is that we are also reconciling with open corporates and trying to map the data, but in terms of the publishing logic, it's exactly the same thing. So we're consuming from this source record stream that I've mentioned from the ingester, and then we're performing any transformations we want to publish our new bod statements. So one of the things that kind of is going to allow is continuous transformation. So you can kind of see from this diagram the example of how it will work. So we have tested this with the PSC streaming API. So we are mostly still using their snapshots that they produce, but they do also have an API where they have their own stream available, where you can say, okay, I want to keep listening for any new data coming through live. So every time we'd see new data coming in live, we would check it, store it in Elasticsearch, and publish it to our stream. And the transformer would instantly see that message, perform anything it needs to, and write it out. So within seconds, you would have it transformed in Elasticsearch, and within whatever buffer threshold you've set, you'd see the files exported in S3. So that's going to be much faster ingestion, etc. So in terms of greater searching capabilities, one of the limitations we had before was that all of the data was stored in a custom format with only some of it indexed like an Elasticsearch. So we had very limited searches that we could actually do on the data. And any search that you wanted to do on the BODS data was generally very difficult because there was a lot of mapping that had to happen for an export to turn it into BODS data. So basically, we're getting source data, we're converting it to a custom format, and then we're converting it again to BODS data to export. So that was a very expensive process, and as I said, not very good in terms of searching if you're trying to do a very complex search. So the new version of Register, everything is now using BODS format. So obviously we keep the raw data as a source, so that can be inspected and searched, but the stuff that we're displaying and showing in the register is all in BODS version 0.2 format with the fields indexed. So this means you can now basically search on any combination of fields you want with an Elasticsearch query. So the next advantage is easier addition of new data sources. So we wanted to make it quicker to add new sources from more countries. So we've established a pattern for this. So we're going to write like a post of a guide of how you would implement something in this way. But one of the nice things about the streaming approach is rather than everything just being based in our Ruby and Rails app, then now other programming languages could be used too. Because the ingester and transformer, you could, if you wanted, have an ingester in whatever language you write, provided that you are publishing to a stream, which things can listen to. So provided your output format's correct, you can do what you want with your ingestion logic. So you could write your own ingester, which is going to publish something, and then the existing transformers could do something with that data. Or conversely, you could decide that you want to transform data in a different way or a different language. So you could use Python, or you could decide you're going to write one which is going to do one of the latest specifications of BODS, and we wouldn't have to worry about the ingestion logic from raw sources again, because all of that work's already been done, working exactly the same way. All you're interested in is listening to this new data coming through.
Hey, so Josh, can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
The question is, so that means I don't have to download a daily updated file. I can listen to your stream loader if we write a code, and then anytime new change comes in, whether it's now or 2 minutes from now, we can take that and update our database.
That is exactly what we're trying to support.
Perfect.
So we are writing to a stream, but that stream is not yet publicly available. So I'm not sure when that is on the roadmap, but this is how it's working in the background now. So all we'd have to do is write something which would expose, which would allow you to call and ask for that stream's data, if that makes sense, or to give some sort of restricted access code to Kinesis.
Thank you.
So the final advantage is that it's much better performance of export. So one of the reasons for that was, as I said before, we needed to do all this custom mapping rather than directly into BODS format. So now that everything is already in BODS format, then instead of needing to scroll through all of the MongoDB collection and try and reconcile the relationships and so on, which was problematic. It could take days at times, because if there was any sort of a problem, we'd have to start all over again. So we had quite a lot of problems when we first started with the exporter. Now the exporter is trivially simple in the sense that all of the data being written out into S3 is already in the correct format. So we're basically just wanting to collect these files together in order, rather than doing any sort of mapping logic at all. So that's obviously much better performance. And again, it kind of, the append-only logic and the fact that we are writing into partitions indexed by day and month and that sort of thing means that we could as well start publishing a diff. So instead of just having a huge file saying this is our data for March or this is our data for April, we could have like a monthly, like this is the new data from May, and you wouldn't be losing anything because of the immutability. So there's more options kind of being open for that as well. So just a diagram in case that makes it helpful. Before was MongoDB, and it had to use Redis extensively to try to cache and order statements, etc., to write to S3. Now we're just reading from S3 and writing to S3. We're just collecting stuff together. So that's much better performance of that. So finally, where does the register app fit into all of this? Well, the register before, which included everything. So before it was the ingestion, the transformation, and trying to inspect and read the data. Now the register itself, a Ruby on Rails app, is just a one tool which can be used on this data. So now as well, if we had any new source, which is already in BODS version 0.2 format, we could simply point our register at that. We wouldn't have to do anything else. So that's kind of much simpler than before, where you had to set up everything in order to be able to transform and ingest that data into our MongoDB format. So those are our advantages, just in case you want to see them again. But that's it. So any questions?
Fantastic. Thank you, Josh. Does anyone have any questions? If you do, raise your hand or put them in the chat if you want me to read them out. No? Okay. So, oh, okay. So there's a question from Ivan. Ivan, please speak. Can you, oh, yeah, sorry, I'll just ask you to unmute.
Yeah, sorry, I just trying to find where it's unmute. Can you tell me what the countries include in all those beneficial information, what you pull in data?
So currently our sources are, so the sources can sometimes talk about other countries as well, but the actual registries which we're consuming are the UK Person of Significant Control, the Denmark registry, and the Slovakia registry. So those are currently the three, but I believe Stu can talk in much more detail about any more in progress. I'm sure there's lots of information about that.
Absolutely, yes. Ivan, yeah, it's a very good question. So part of this work that Josh was just unveiling was driven by, there are more and more countries who are adopting BODS, like our data standard, the beneficial ownership data standard. And when they produce data, we want to put it straight in. So we're in very advanced talks with Latvia, Nigeria are both using BODS already, and we want to incorporate their data. There's other countries, like we said, Portugal earlier on, Slovakia, that have promised to use it for multiple registers. Canada has signed up. So this work is a precursor to that. So we expect there to be more sources available in BODS. We also do work ourselves at Open Ownership to map sources. So Emma, my colleague on here, has been trying to map the French beneficial ownership data to BODS, and all of the sources that we can get hold of that stay public, that can be produced in line with our data standard, we will work to get into the Open Ownership Register. But like Josh said, yeah, at the moment we have the primary beneficial ownership registers from the UK and Denmark, and it's the public sector partner registers from Slovakia.
And how about Asia? You know, like is that somewhere on your roadmap? You know, it's interesting. China,
Yeah, so we have I have a colleague based in the Philippines, and we've been doing a lot of work with the Philippines and Indonesia that have made promises around this. We don't have any sources at the moment from that region. We're doing work with governments all over the world. So Latin America, people across Africa. So we're doing work with South Africa, Kenya, and other places. So we'll try. We're doing our best. And if they produce it themselves, like Canada is doing, we really hope to incorporate those into the register, building on the work that Josh has done. Thank you all for joining. I've realized that we are out of time. So thank you so much to all the presenters, and thank you very much for everyone who's joined us for the discussions today. And yeah, please do let me know if you have any further questions that we didn't answer in the session today. But thank you all very much for joining us, and have a good rest of the day.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.